I used to think internet arguments were about truth. They're not. They're about emotional dodgeball with screenshots. Because nobody logs onto social media thinking, today, I hope a stranger publicly humiliates me into personal growth. That has literally never happened. A guy could write a 4-7 tweet thread explaining why your opinion is objectively wrong using charts, peer-reviewed studies, historical evidence, and 3 different Wikipedia tabs open at once, and your brain still goes, interesting, counterpoint, shut up. And that's because online arguments aren't really about information. They're about identity. Which is unfortunate, because the internet was supposedly invented so humanity could share knowledge. Instead, we used it to create infinite psychological warfare between people named things like Captain Fax 420 and Tax Frog Patriot. And the weirdest part is that everybody thinks they're the rational one. Every single person in an internet debate believes they are the calm intellectual hero standing against misinformation. Meanwhile, both sides are typing, "You clearly don't understand basic logic," with tears in their eyes at 2:14 a.m. The reason this happens has a lot to do with cognitive psychology and how belief formation actually works. Because humans don't absorb information like unbiased scientists. We absorb information like lawyers defending a client we already decided is innocent. That's confirmation bias, one of the strongest cognitive biases in communication. If evidence supports what you already believe, your brain highlights it like a sacred prophecy. But contradictory evidence? Your brain suddenly develops the reading comprehension of a goldfish. This is called selective attention, and it completely destroys internet debates because 2 people can look at the exact same information and walk away believing opposite things harder than before. Which sounds impossible until you remember human reasoning and decision-making were never designed for Twitter. They were designed for surviving in tribes without being eaten by wolves. Back then, changing your beliefs too often could get you socially exiled. Today, it just gets you ratioed. That's why social identity and beliefs are so connected. Your opinions don't just feel like ideas, they feel like you. Political polarization especially works this way. If someone attacks your opinion online, your brain interprets it less like, "Here is new evidence," and more like, "This stranger wants to destroy your tribe." That triggers emotional reasoning instead of critical thinking. Now, instead of evaluating facts, your brain starts assembling rhetorical strategy like a medieval defense system. You stop asking, "Is this true?" and start asking, "How do I win?" And once argumentative behavior becomes competitive instead of cooperative, persuasion psychology basically dies instantly. At that point, the debate is no longer about truth. It becomes performance art for invisible audiences. You're not talking to the other person. You're talking through them to your followers, your friends, and the imaginary crowd in your head applauding your comeback. Which explains why online conflict dynamics escalate so fast. A disagreement becomes, "Oh, so you're saying, no, that's not what I said. Okay, but that's basically what you meant. Are you even reading?" Classic response. And now somehow a conversation about movie rankings has become a 4-hour war crime tribunal. The internet communication psychology here gets even worse because text removes tone, facial expression, and context. So your brain fills in the gaps itself. Unfortunately, your brain is terrible at this. A neutral sentence online can be interpreted as sarcastic, hostile, arrogant, passive-aggressive, manipulative, or secretly political depending on the emotional state of the reader. And then there's the backfire effect, possibly the funniest and most depressing feature of the human brain. The backfire effect is when misinformation correction accidentally reinforces false belief reinforcement instead of fixing it, which means correcting someone online can literally make them believe the wrong thing more. Researchers think part of this happens because of the familiarity heuristic. Your brain uses repetition as evidence of truth, which is deeply unfortunate because the internet repeats everything constantly. This creates the truth illusion effect. If you hear something enough times, your brain slowly transitions from, "That sounds fake," to, "I've heard it a lot though." The misinformation repetition effect is especially brutal online because every attempt to debunk a bad idea often requires repeating the bad idea first. So even if people forget the correction, the original misinformation stays emotionally sticky in memory influence systems. Your brain remembers familiarity better than nuance. That's why changing minds online is unbelievably difficult. And honestly, the smarter people get, the weirder this becomes. There's research showing highly intelligent people are often better at biased reasoning because they're more skilled at rationalization mechanisms, meaning intelligence doesn't necessarily reduce ideological bias. Sometimes it just gives people better vocabulary for being wrong confidently. The core issue is identity protective cognition. When beliefs become emotionally attached to group identity influence, resistance to evidence skyrockets. Because changing your opinion no longer feels like learning, it feels like betrayal. That creates psychological entrenchment, mindset rigidity, and full-blown opinion polarization where both sides become incapable of interpreting evidence outside their own cognitive filtering systems. Which is why internet debates often feel like two people using the same words to describe completely different realities. One person says, freedom. The other hears, selfishness. One person says, fairness. The other hears, control. Communication framing effects completely reshape persuasion. Outcomes. Language framing in persuasion matters more than most people realize. Even tiny wording changes can radically alter argument effectiveness. Which is hilarious because online arguments usually use the subtle rhetorical strategy of, you moron, shockingly ineffective interpersonal persuasion tactic. Another problem is psychological reactance. Humans hate feeling controlled. The second someone online aggressively tells you what to think, your brain instinctively pushes back, even if they're correct. Especially if they're correct. Nothing activates resistance to changing opinions faster than a condescending reply from someone with an anime profile picture. And once emotional investment in beliefs gets involved, cognitive dissonance takes over. Because admitting you're wrong online feels awful. Not privately awful, publicly awful. Now your old tweets exist, screenshots exist, your mutuals exist, and somewhere out there is a guy who bookmarked the argument waiting 6 months to reply. Still think this? The internet never forgets, which means social media discussions accidentally weaponized human ego against attitude change. Honestly, the only time persuasion strategies seem to work online is when people don't feel cornered. Studies on debate psychology show people become more open when conversations feel collaborative instead of combative. Using softer wording, showing curiosity, and avoiding direct humiliation works far better than screaming in all caps for 6 hours. And even then, success rates are tiny. Because humans don't build beliefs using pure logic. We build them socially, emotionally, and tribally. Then afterward, we invent reasoning to justify them. Which sounds cynical until you realize literally everyone does this. Including you, including me, including the guy typing source while ignoring all the sources. The truly terrifying part about online arguments is that everybody thinks cognitive bias applies to other people. Nobody wakes up thinking, today my evidence interpretation bias will distort my worldview. Everybody thinks they're the exception, the enlightened one, the free thinker. Meanwhile, their entire worldview was assembled by 3 podcasts, 2 TikToks, and 1 emotionally devastating Reddit thread from 2018. And honestly, once you understand the behavioral psychology of debates, the internet becomes a lot funnier. Because every comment section is basically thousands of brains trying to defend their self-concept while pretending it's about facts. That's why every internet argument feels unwinnable. Nobody's actually debating information. They're defending identity, and identity is stubborn. So the next time you spend 45 minutes typing a perfect response with links, evidence, citations, and immaculate formatting, and the other person replies, lol cope. Just remember, from a psychological perspective, they probably think they won. And if you like this video, consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment below telling me the dumbest internet argument you've ever been trapped in. Because statistically speaking, someone is probably arguing about it right now.